Hey everyone, welcome to episode 1 of How to Make Your Own Miniatures Game. I am Rick Graham, owner of White Light Media and author and creator of the sci-fi universe Revelations and the Revelations Skirmish Miniatures Game. Now, before we kind of get into the different topics of this show, I want to kind of go over just briefly of how this show is going to go and grow over time. I know that this show will continue to be molded and improved over time. What I'm doing now, what I'm doing this moment as I record this, and you fast forward a couple of years from now, this podcast will be very different from then. That's very true if you listen to other podcast creators or other content creators, people on YouTube. If you watch or listen to their earlier work, by the time you get to what is current now, after months or years have passed, their content has improved dramatically. So sometimes you might hear vehicles in the background driving by because I'm in my apartment and our windows aren't so good. Or you might hear the slight cry of a baby in the background because we have our recently delivered third child. So there might be some of that. And I'm going to continue to learn better ways to be able to make this content more just better quality over time. The other thing is that I'm going to talk to you like I was talking to a friend over the phone. So I'm trying not to come across sounding nervous. I'm trying not to come across as a know-it-all or as someone that you can't relate to. I'm trying to keep in mind, even though I'm basically in my apartment talking to myself right now, that I'm trying to be mindful that I'm talking to a person on the other side looking for information. And what would I tell a younger me? Someone looking for ways or some tips or some tricks on how to be able to build my own miniatures game. What would I need? So I'm trying to keep that in my mind as we go through this. And the other thing is, I don't have all the answers, and I'm learning too. Yeah, I have created my own miniatures game. Yes, I'm working on a new miniatures game, Field of Legends, which is going to be an awesome game. Yes, I have published 5 books. Yes, I've done all these things that sound really impressive, but there is still always something to learn. I'm one of my weaker areas, being transparent, is in marketing. I feel very capable of coordinating a team of freelancers and artists to be able to build this really awesome visual aspect of my game. I feel really confident in developing the rules, the stats, how to roll it out, envisioning what the universe would look like, getting the models created, finding funding to get it made, doing all of the other components, interacting with players, production, which we'll get into as well. And the thing that I'm learning is marketing. So as I record this, it is December 27th, 2020. So one of the things that I'm looking to do next year is I want to force myself to learn marketing. I've put it off, and it's very apparent that you need it, and it's a new skill, and it's a skill that I've tried to learn, but it's not one that I've enjoyed because it's not comfortable for me. It's not it's not how I think, right? I think more methodically. I think more creatively. And when it comes to the marketing side, there's just a lot of components to that I'm learning. There's other things that I'm learning as well, as far as, sticking to my own rules, which we'll get into later, as far as how you get your art created and everything else, and life lessons that I've learned there as well. So I just want to kind of say that if you want to become a game creator, and you could listen to this podcast, and it's not necessarily, you don't necessarily have to be trying to create a miniatures game. You could be trying to create a card game, a tabletop board game, anything, any sort of game. And you could still listen to this, and there would still be lots of helpful tips for you. That's what I'm hoping. But specifically for my miniature creators, I might be a little bit further up the road than you. And, from where you are having no game, or you have a loose idea for your rules, or you're just starting to get into like what your concept would be, or, how will I do production? All those questions, I may seem way further up the road, but in my mind, I'm only like a couple steps ahead, right? My company is nowhere near a Games Workshop level or a Fantasy Flight or Wizards of the Coast or any of those other bigger players. I'm nowhere near those guys yet. I'm a much smaller operation, but currently my business has no debt. So I've been able to get all of our models funded and all this other stuff. And we'll get into all that later, but I just want to say that it may look like I'm further ahead, and I don't say that to discourage you. I'm trying to encourage you that you can get where I am, and I didn't go to school to be a game creator. Far from it, actually. I didn't go to school. I'm not an artist. I can't paint for illustrations. I can't draw for concept art. My thing has been that I can write and then I can be creative and I can do enough of putting things together and then get a product created. So I'm going to share with you what I've learned over the next couple of weeks and months. And I'm excited for this journey because it's going to be a really cool opportunity to be able to help somebody else in ways that I couldn't find answers all the time, right? So we'll get into that. All right. So in some of these episodes, we're probably going to have one topic. And then in others, like today, we're going to be going over a couple of different questions. And just because they're smaller and they don't need to have an entire episode. Maybe down the road, we'll also be able to interview some other creators or other artists or other modelers, other people in the industry to kind of help you guys see things from their perspective as well. And also to just learn from other creators in different situations, right? So one of the first things I was trying to think of, for this episode, you're going to be like, okay, I want to make a game, but maybe I have no ideas, nowhere to start from. I don't know what's the first step. If you don't already have a very strong, clear idea of what you want. So we're going to try to start pretty much at zero. One of the first things that I could tell you is that, at least for me, game creating is not a linear process. It is a little bit scattered. It is a little bit chaotic. It is a little bit crazy at times because you are not, in my experience, you are not able to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. Step one, build a universe. Okay, we'll go ahead and we'll sit down for a couple hours. We'll hash out what the universe is. All right, step 2, we'll do this. Step 3, step 4, step 5, step 10. All right, now we're going to get models made, and we're not going to do anything else until all the models are created. Now, while that sounds nice and organized and maybe desirable for you, I have found in my experience that is not how it is. There will be times you have to multitask or you have to have multiple things going. You'll have, one of your artists is doing concept art for you. Maybe you have another artist working on a model, and then you have, you're still hammering out and play testing the rules and a new core mechanic that you want to implement. You don't have to do it my way. You don't have to do it at the speed that I do it. But I'm going to go over how I do it, and I want you to modify it to whatever way makes sense for you. If you have to go slower and more methodical to get it to where you want it or where you feel comfortable or where you have time available to do it, fine. Do what you have to do. Nobody is rushing you. Nobody is pressuring you except very likely yourself. Understand that when you first sit down, you're going to start making a game and you've made that decision. This is probably going to be a 1 to 2 year commitment out of the door. Maybe it might take you longer depending on how much free time or how much dedication you have to that project, because you could have a very busy schedule, or you have lots of free time and this is really what you want to do. You see 3D printing exploding. You see indie game creation exploding and you want to be in on that. And you want time or you have time and you're ready to dedicate, maybe you can go a lot faster. But I know that with Revelation Skirmish, it took me, it was like a year that we went from beginning to have models to rolling out. And there was a lot of other stuff that happened in between there. And I was very blessed and fortunate to have had extra money from my freelance business to have money to invest. Because I don't know how to do modeling or concept art or illustration. So I had to hire people. I had to hire multiple artists to help me get to where I could get to launch. So I'm not saying all this to make you have a panic attack, because there's like, oh, Rick, this is way too many things to do all at once. It is a lot. But you'll, jump into the parts where you feel inspired. Jump into the parts when it's your first project, jump into parts, areas that are very important, and you have the energy to do it today. So sometimes I'm feeling really excited about writing rules. Or, well, as I was saying, I'm switching things into creating my second game, Field of Legends. So I'm doing new things here where I've got a bunch of guys doing different concept art for me. So maybe one day I'm like, all right, let's do concept art. And I'm just banging ideas out for that to be able to send out to people. Or I'm following up on concept art. Or I'm giving notes on changes to make. Or I decided, all right, let's work on some rules today. Let's work on some lore today. Let's work on some marketing today. So I'll do some social media posts or something. So there's a lot of things to do. It's difficult to do by yourself. I can tell you that. For the most part, I am a one-man operation. My wife helps here and there, but she's very busy. And now that we have a third child, she's going to even be busier. As far as, she just doesn't have a lot of extra time to pick up and do social media posts or other things to help. I don't have a lot of extra money right now to hire a whole big team. So I'm making do with what I got, right? But I'm still moving forward. I'm making progress. We still have one game rolled out with new expansions coming out all the time, and we're moving forward with Field of Legends. So it's a very exciting time for myself. There's just a lot happening. So just don't feel too much pressure. Okay, because there is a lot of pressure. If you're anything like me, you'll put a lot of pressure on yourself, and I would rather be able to encourage you not to do that. It'll probably happen at times anyway, and then you just remember, I'm moving as fast as I can as a 1 or 2 person operation, and you'll get through it, and you have to just remember progress is progress, and if you can work on it for 30 minutes a day, you're making more progress than a lot of people. And that's not to put a lot of people down, but if you're not making progress, you're not making progress. You can't make progress every day, especially if you got a full-time job, you got kids, you're going to school, you got other obligations. You can't do it all the time, but you'll make progress as you can moving forward. So one of the most important things out of the gate that you need to know is what type of game do you want your game to be? More than likely, if you're listening to this podcast, you want it to be a miniatures game, which to me is one of the superior gaming experiences. I love playing miniature games. I have so many good memories, so many life lessons that I have learned from gaming. I like miniature gaming a lot more than video games or card games, dice games, other stuff like that, because you're typically in a more of a commanding situation where it's either a small team or a military operation kind of thing. It just feels more, it's as much of an exercise in my mind of trying to outwit your opponent while trying to play tactically. So there's just a lot of things going on. So versus like if you're playing a lot of card games, there's much fewer choices that you can make. There's just a difference of opinion. I just love miniature games, and you need to know what type of game do you want your game to be. Once you settle on board game, tabletop game, all the different types of games and sub genres that are now, being created every couple of years, you need to know and decide on what is the scope and the scale of your game. So by that, I mean, scale, what size do you want your miniatures to be in? What scale do you want it to be? Typically, we'll probably make an episode focusing a lot on scale, because scale is kind of a touchy subject, and not in bad ways, but it just, when you start doing research for scaling, And you're like, okay, what scale is Warhammer 40K? And you're like, oh, it's 28 millimeter heroic. Well, what the heck does heroic mean? Oh, you look it up and it means certain parts of the anatomy of the miniature are going to be exaggerated so that it looks bigger or more dynamic in different ways. So maybe the feet are bigger, or the weapons are bigger, or the arms are bigger, the helmet, whatever. Okay, that's a weird way to do it when you start to understand. And then you look at, well, what scale is Star Wars Legion? What scale is War Machine or Hordes, or just pick whatever miniature game, out there. And you're like, well, why are these games so many different scales? Why is there not some sort of uniform thinking process? And then when you start doing research, you'll learn that scale isn't the same, even if two models from two different companies are 28 millimeter or 30 millimeter, whatever scale they're using. Some companies measure from the bottom of the feet to eye level, while others measure from the bottom of the feet to the top of the head. So even if they're 28 millimeters, they might be slightly larger or smaller than other companies because they've decided that their scale system measures in a different way. So scale, to me, doesn't super matter. It needs to be the scale that accomplishes whatever you're trying to do in your game. So for example, Revelation Skirmish, my miniatures game, I decided to go with 12 millimeters. And that's technically slightly a little bit, I believe, larger than regular 12 millimeter. The reason that I chose to do that was I wanted my miniature game to be able to be played on a 3x3. Why? Because not a lot of people have 6x3 space or 6x4. I figure most people have a 3x3 kitchen table or folding table, something. They have some way to be able to play on a 3x3 space or pretty close to it. And I wanted my rule set to work and my miniatures to be scaled to work at that level. So by kind of knowing what my objective was and working backwards, I could then arrive at what was the kind of scale that would accomplish what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to field, in Revelation Skirmish, we call it a company, which is, for those that are non-military, a company is a certain size of your organization of your military forces. Now, that word isn't necessarily uniform across all the different even militaries on actual Earth, or when you start getting to sci-fi or fantasy, it changes dramatically because it's whatever you decide it to be. So for Revelation Skirmish, that means 12 units. So that can be composed of war mechs, tanks, or other vehicles, or infantry and power armor. So I wanted to be able to have 12 units, so a whole company of forces on the table for each player. So if you have two players, they're both going to be going at it with a company. So that's up to, it's 24 units, but it could be more models than 24. So by making this scale smaller, we could accomplish that so that it felt like you had a larger number of forces and you could still play in a smaller space, but the models were still large enough at 12 millimeter versus 6 or 8 or 10, which are much more common. 12 millimeter allowed more details, and it made the mechs feel a little bit bigger. So this is all just the business thinking that I was going through as a creator and then as the business owner. I wanted the mechs to feel imposing. Because all of my production method involves 3D resin printing. So, which I handle all the 3D printing in-house, and we're also selling STLs so that people can use, for personal use, they can print their own armies. But I wanted the game to be as close to true scale with one another as possible. So I wanted when a player held a base of infantry, I wanted them to be able to hold it up to a war mech and be like, wow, that's how big a mech would be in real life, because these miniature men are, they're at true scale for 12 millimeter for them, right? So that way, and the great thing about 3D resin printing is you can do that. You can control everything with your slicing program so that it is as close to accurate as you can get it with math. So that's what I wanted to do, and that's how I kind of worked my way to that process. Another thing that helped me to get to the 12 millimeter scale was a financial decision. I've been playing miniature games for close to 20 years now. I've played a lot of different games from a lot of different companies. I spent a lot of money playing all these different games, and I experienced things as a young teenager to now a male adult in his 30s. So I've been able to see from a lot of different perspectives of how do the prices and the increases in prices affect a player. You know, not all of us have a very large gaming budget. Outside of Revelation Skirmish, you know, I only play one miniature game right now, Star Wars Legion. Technically, I still have all my BattleTech stuff, so I do have another game that I can play, but Star Wars Legion is my hobby, right? And I pay very much attention to those price increases. And I wanted to be aware of that for my players as well. And I knew that 15 millimeter was a much more common scale. But 15 millimeter would mean that my mechs would have to be much more expensive. And then when it came to 3D printing, I would, if you don't know much about 3D printing yet, we'll cover more as we go along. But basically, when you use 3D resin printing, you have a build platform. Just imagine like a metal plate about the size of an index card that lowers depending on the size of your resin printer. So we'll just say for the sake of this argument, it's an index card size metal plate that dips into a liquid resin and then is layer by layer, you know, UV cured so that it will build the model. If I were to do 15 millimeter mechs, my build plate, I'd only be able to print one mech at a time, taking 6 hours depending on what size the model was and how I was slicing it and dividing up the parts. I could be 6, 8, 10 hours depending on what was going on. Well, that's one mech, meaning I can only produce that one on that one machine for, let's say, 8 hours as an average. So if I have a customer come and buy my model, I have to be able to recoup my cost, my resin, right? All the development costs. And then also I need to be able to be like, well, I've got one printer that was down for 8 hours while I printed your one mech. So that means this mech's going to be 50 or 60 bucks. I know that as a gamer, 50 or 60 bucks for a single model hurts my wallet really bad. And I was not interested in that. So I was able to bring my prices down by making the size of the entire game smaller. So I also made it more affordable for players. So I had all this going on in my head while I was deciding on the scale. I'm also of the mindset that I don't really care if my models fit the scale of other games. Well, why? Rick, that's crazy. Why wouldn't you size your things to be the same general scale as Warhammer 40K or all these other miniature games that are out there? Because when people play other game engines, they want to be able to use your models to play those other engines. Well, first off, as a game creator, and this is probably going to sound kind of condescending, but as one creator talking to hopefully another person interested in becoming a creator, I don't care if people play my models and play another game. If somebody comes to me and buys my model and goes and plays another game engine, that's fine. You know, that's their prerogative. I'm more than happy to sell a model to a player that's going to go play another engine. But I'm not going to design my models on purpose only so that they'll buy my models and go play another game. I want them to play my game. And you'll notice this, that even when you have companies that have whatever scale they choose and other companies that have the same quote unquote scale, they'll still be a little bit taller, a little bit shorter, a little bit wider. Something else is different. And in my opinion, it's so that you don't mix. You can't tell me that Games Workshop wants you to buy their models and play other game engines. They want you to buy their models and play their game because they want you to be excited about their brand, about their universe, about their game, about their product. They don't want to sell you one box of Space Marines. They want to sell you armies. They want you to love Warhammer 40K. And that's what I want with Revelation Skirmish. And now with Field of Legends. I want you to want to play my game. Now, some people have no issue with scale. Some players will be like, I don't care what scale it is. For me, I don't care. When I look at other games, I'm not really worried about what scale the game is in. Why? Because if I'm interested in a game, I'm interested in a game. That's it. Is it nice when certain aspects kind of mix together or at least are comparable? I guess. But to me, it doesn't really matter because I'm not playing Star Wars Legion so that my models will be scaled with Warhammer 40K or with War Machine. I'm playing Star Wars Legion because I'm interested in Star Wars Legion. And that's basically all that matters to me. Now, if you play games where there's a lot of custom unit options or other things, that's great. That's an added bonus. But when I'm typically playing a game, I'm going to be looking for other players to play that game and try to grow a group. I don't want to try to convince them to play the game, but then start playing with all these custom units. I want them first to just get into the game, right? So at least with my process, when I decided the scale for Revelation Skirmish being 12 millimeters, I wasn't really worried about it because that was what I wanted to do. Some players were on board, other players weren't. I know that I had customers tell me, and I'll be straight up and honest, that told me that I'm not going to buy your models because they're not in whatever scale that they wanted it to be in. But again, if I got a preference, I don't want people to buy Revelations models to go play another game. I want them to buy Revelations models to play Revelations, because that's how my business is going to continue to grow, and that I can continue to employ artists and one day writers and editors and other people involved in the process. I want to grow my company to be fully staffed full-time by multiple people, and we continue to grow and expand and create new games and new expansions and all kinds of stuff so that the players are entertained. Because I know at the end of the day, miniatures games falls into entertainment, the whole column of entertainment, and that's escapism for people. It gives people a break from the real world, and right now, the real world is hella stressful. But I recognize it's just a hobby, and I know that they have to prioritize eating and shelter and their rent and all these other things that are much more important. But at the end of the day, I still want to try to grow my company, right? And if someone's buying my models to go play Grunts or some other rules engine, well, like I said, I'll be happy to sell them the model. I'm not going to encourage them to buy my stuff and go play something else. You know what I mean? And I would encourage you to do the same. Decide on a scale because you enjoy it, or because you see a financial incentive, such as it's already an established game, or an established scale. So like if you create a game that's in the scale of Warhammer 40K, and you can say, hey guys, all that terrain you already have will work in my game. Now you might incentivize some people. Or, guys, I made it smaller so that it's cheaper, so that you can have larger armies. Whatever your selling point is, whatever your I don't want to say gimmick, but whatever your main point or objective is with that idea, okay? I feel like I went on a long time for that tangent. I apologize. I have some pent-up aggression, I guess, at that. The other point of that question was, what is the scope of your game? Meaning, do you want your game to be a small team, maybe 4 models, 5 models, 10 models fighting? Or do you want it to be a skirmish somewhere in between 10 and 20 models per side? Do you want it to be, more like Revelation Skirmish, where you're playing on a company level? So now you're incorporating vehicles or mechanized units within your forces. Is it, if it's like a space, maybe like a battle space naval game, that's it. So you're gonna have large warships and these little fighters, or is it just squadron based? So there's all these different things that you have to decide on. What is the scope of the game? And that will help also to determine how much play space will you need. And I would encourage you not to go beyond 6x4. Why? Because a lot of people already don't have 6x4, but if they have a local game store they can go to, or a buddy who has it, then that's available. But try to, in my opinion, being able to make it work for the most amount of people in terms of space is a selling point. If your game is like, well, no, you have to play on an 8x10 wooden table in order to be able to experience the full magnitude of this game, a lot of people don't have that space, so that won't really mean much to them. So both scope and scale will work together to help you decide on what the other one needs to be. And you do have permission, from yourself to make changes. And if you decide at first, because when I first was designing Revelation Skirmish a couple years ago, the scale was much bigger. It probably was a little bigger actually than 15 millimeter was what I was going for. And when I started to work backwards and I started figuring out, okay, you need so much more space to play. It's going to be so much more cost for the player, so much more cost for me to develop. or more for production. I'm like, man, that's going to get really expensive for everybody involved. So then that sort of helped me to start working backwards. But I started larger and came down so that it made more sense for me. So you may pick 28, 30, some other larger scale, and then come back down to a more comfortable level because you find a place where it's your sweet spot, right? All right. I think we're at a good stopping point for this first episode. I hope that this has been helpful to you guys to help get your brain going. I've got a lot of ideas for future episodes, so there's going to be a lot more content coming. If you would like to be able to check out either Revelation Skirmish, the Revelations Universe, Field of Legends, or just to check out what other projects I'm involved in or my company is involved in, you can go to whitelightmedia.org, and from there you'll see all the different links to social media, my web store for Revelations, and everything else that you can ever hope to want to know. And anyway, thank you guys very much for listening to this episode. I'm excited about this series. It's something that I'm obviously very passionate about as another creator, and being able to talk to other like-minded people is a big deal for me, because I really, in my network, even of other people, I've only met a couple of other creators, and it's, we have similar challenges on different levels of what we're trying to accomplish and what we're running into. So it's always exciting for me to be able to speak with other creators. So anyway, guys, thank you very much, and stay tuned for the next episode.